Ever wonder what it feels like to watch your professional reputation crumble in real time? I found out 3 months ago when Derek Lawson, our new product lead, decided my 15 years of quality assurance experience was outdated baggage. I'd been with Green Bay Technologies since the company operated out of a cramped WeWork space in downtown Seattle, where the coffee machine was perpetually broken and we shared desks with a cryptocurrency startup that folded within 6 months. Back then, our founder Emma Caldwell would personally review every major release. I remember her sitting cross-legged on the floor during all-hands meetings, sketching user workflows on whiteboards while explaining why we'd rather delay a launch than ship broken software. Users trust us with their data, their money, their business operations, Emma used to say. That trust isn't renewable. Once you break it, you spend years earning it back, if you're lucky enough to get the chance. We tested everything meticulously, every feature, every update, every user pathway, every edge case our creative minds could imagine. I'd personally oversee penetration tests, load simulations, and accessibility audits. Quality wasn't just a department, it was our religion, our competitive advantage, our identity. But that was before Emma sold to a private equity firm for $200 million. Before the venture capital money arrived with its demands for hockey stick growth. Before the aggressive quarterly targets and the consultants who spoke exclusively in business jargon. And certainly before Derek swept in with his Stanford MBA, his collection of productivity podcasts, and his gospel of move fast and break things. The morning of our team meeting, Derek strutted into the conference room wearing his signature smirk and a hoodie that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. His laptop was covered in startup stickers, Y Combinator, Product Hunt, various unicorn companies that had either been acquired or imploded spectacularly. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never personally dealt with the aftermath of a system-wide failure at 3 a.m. on a Sunday. Our mobile app's beta launch was 3 days away, a critical release that would determine whether we could secure our Series B funding. The app represented 18 months of development, integrating payment processing, real-time messaging, and complex user analytics. Failure wouldn't just embarrass us, it could sink the company. The conference room itself felt different under Derek's leadership. Gone were Emma's hand-drawn user journey maps, replaced by sleek digital displays showing conversion funnels and growth metrics. The old collaborative energy had been replaced by something colder, more hierarchical. "Alice, I've made some adjustments to the launch protocol," Derek announced, not bothering to look up from his tablet where he was presumably checking his LinkedIn notifications. "The interns can manage user feedback. You're stuck in outdated methods." The room went silent. James Peterson, our senior iOS developer who'd been with the company almost as long as I had, stopped mid-sip of his coffee. Rachel Moore, our UX researcher, looked like she'd been slapped. Our 2 junior developers, Kelly Wright and Sam Rodriguez, exchanged uncomfortable glances. Sarah Chen, our lead engineer and one of the most respected voices on the team, shifted in her chair and began tapping her pen against her notebook in a rhythm I recognized as barely contained frustration. The interns Derek referenced were enthusiastic college seniors who joined us 6 weeks ago. Bright kids, certainly, but they'd never managed a crisis situation where thousands of angry users were demanding immediate solutions while executives screamed for status updates and journalists started asking pointed questions about company competence. "Derek, we haven't completed the stress testing protocols," I said, keeping my voice steady despite feeling my blood pressure spike. "The payment integration needs at least 48 more hours of validation. We've identified 7 potential failure points in the transaction flow alone." He chuckled, that dismissive sound that had become his trademark, a noise that somehow conveyed both superiority and impatience in a single breath. "We can't let perfectionism paralyze progress. The market won't wait for your exhaustive checklists. Those checklists have prevented every major system failure we've avoided over the past decade. Last spring, they caught a security vulnerability that could have exposed user financial data." "Exactly my point. You're fighting yesterday's battles." Derek finally looked up, his expression the kind of condescending patience typically reserved for explaining obvious concepts to children. "The beta users will help us identify issues. Real-world testing beats laboratory scenarios every time. It's called fail fast, learn fast." James leaned forward. "Derek, with respect, real-world testing with financial transactions isn't like testing a social media feature. When people's money disappears, they don't congratulate you on your iterative learning process." I felt heat rising in my chest, but held back. Arguing with Derek in public had become a losing proposition. He'd already marginalized 2 other senior staff members who'd challenged his methods. That evening, I stayed late in the nearly empty office, the only sounds the hum of servers and the occasional ping of automated system monitoring alerts. The cleaning crew had long since finished their rounds. Security guard Williams made his usual rounds, nodding at me through the glass partition with the weary recognition of someone who'd seen too many tech workers burn themselves out chasing impossible deadlines. I ran unauthorized stress tests on the beta build, using a combination of automated tools and manual scenarios that simulated real user behavior under various network conditions. What I discovered made my stomach drop and my hands shake with a mixture of professional horror and vindicated dread. The payment system crashed when processing more than 50 concurrent transactions, a load we'd easily exceed within the first hour of launch. User authentication failed intermittently when users accessed the app through certain mobile carriers, particularly T-Mobile and Verizon. The notification service leaked memory like a punctured balloon, gradually consuming system resources until the entire application became unresponsive. But the worst discovery was in the data synchronization layer. Under specific conditions, when users switched between Wi-Fi and cellular data while in the middle of a transaction, the system would occasionally double-charge users while displaying a failure message. They'd be charged twice but receive no confirmation that their payment had processed. I documented everything in a detailed report, complete with screenshots, error logs, reproduction steps, and recommended fixes with estimated implementation times. The document ran 12 pages and included technical specifications that any competent developer could follow to reproduce and resolve the issues. I sent it to Derek at midnight, copying Sarah and our CTO, Robert Fleming, along with a summary email that began, "Critical issues identified in beta build require immediate attention before Thursday launch." Derek's response arrived at 7 a.m., clearly composed on his phone during his morning run. "Thanks for the feedback. We're proceeding as planned. Market timing is more important than theoretical edge cases." I stared at that message for a full minute, reading it 3 times to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. Theoretical edge cases. He was calling double-charging users a theoretical edge case. The beta launched Thursday morning to 5,000 carefully selected users, influencers, tech journalists, potential enterprise clients, and employees from partner companies. Derek had personally curated the list to maximize positive social media exposure and industry buzz. By 10 a.m., the first complaints started trickling into our support system. Payment failures, login issues, app crashes during peak usage. Nothing catastrophic yet, but concerning patterns for anyone who knew how to read the signs. By noon, our customer service inbox was flooded with increasingly frustrated messages. Users reported being charged multiple times for single transactions. Others couldn't log in at all. The app was crashing on older Android devices. The notification system was sending duplicates, sometimes 20 or 30 copies of the same message. Sarah had positioned herself at her desk like a general commanding troops during a siege, fielding emergency calls from the development team while monitoring system logs that painted an increasingly dire picture. "Alice, look at this," she said, pointing to her screen where server metrics showed a steady climb in error rates. "We're at 15% failure rate on payment processing. Memory usage is spiking every 12 minutes like clockwork." By 2 p.m., angry posts were spreading across social media. Screenshots of error messages. Users complaining about mysterious charges appearing on their credit card statements. A particularly influential tech blogger named Mark Stevenson posted a thread that began, "New at Green Bay Tech Beta is a masterclass in how not to launch software. Double charged me $200 and then told me the transaction failed. Professional company or amateur hour?" His thread was retweeted 400 times within an hour. By 4 p.m., tech blogs were writing articles about Green Bay's catastrophic beta disaster. The headlines were brutal: Green Bay Technologies beta launch, a case study in quality assurance failure, when fast scaling goes wrong, inside Green Bay's payment processing nightmare, and worst of all, is Green Bay Technologies the next Theranos? That's when Derek barged into my office, his usual swagger replaced by panic and what looked like barely controlled rage. His hoodie was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and there were stress lines around his eyes that hadn't been there that morning. Behind him, I could see Kelly and Sam hovering nervously by the coffee machine, clearly afraid to approach but obviously assigned to help with damage control. Why is the app throwing errors and crashing for thousands of users? He demanded, his voice carrying across the open office space and causing several heads to turn in our direction. I looked up from my computer, where I'd been monitoring the cascade of system failures in real time while fielding increasingly frantic calls from our customer service team. The payment processing dashboard looked like a medical chart for a patient in critical condition, red alerts, flatlined metrics, and error rates climbing toward total system failure. Because we skipped the stress testing protocols. The payment integration can't handle concurrent transactions above 50 users. The authentication service has a memory leak that causes progressive degradation. The notification system is stuck in recursive loops. The data synchronization layer has race conditions that cause double charging. Should I continue? I don't need a technical postmortem right now, Derek interrupted, waving his hands dismissively. I need solutions. I need this fixed in the next 2 hours. We've got journalists asking questions, investors polling meetings, and a board member who's been texting Robert every 10 minutes. The solutions were in the report I sent you Monday night. 12 pages of documented issues with specific fixes and implementation timelines. If we'd started Monday, we could have resolved 60% of these problems. His face flushed red, and I could see a vein pulsing in his temple. This is exactly the kind of "I told you so" attitude that makes you unemployable in modern tech companies. You're more interested in being right than being helpful. Derek, I'm trying to help fix the immediate problems while preventing. No, you're trying to cover your ass and prove some point about old-school development methodologies. If you'd been more collaborative instead of hiding behind bureaucratic processes, maybe we could have prevented this. The accusation hit like a physical blow, partly because of its unfairness but mostly because I could see other team members watching our confrontation. James had stopped pretending to work on his laptop. Rachel was openly staring. Even the normally diplomatic Sarah looked shocked by Derek's accusation. After 15 years of preventing disasters, staying late to run extra tests, documenting risks that others preferred to ignore, I was being blamed for the one catastrophe I'd specifically tried to prevent. The irony would have been amusing if my career weren't hanging in the balance. Within hours, Derek had called an emergency executive meeting in the top-floor conference room with its panoramic view of Elliott Bay. I wasn't invited, but Sarah filled me in later while we shared a tense coffee break in the kitchen area that had become an impromptu war room for the development team. He's spinning this as a failure of the quality assurance process, she whispered, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard by any of Derek's allies. Claims you didn't adequately communicate the risks to leadership in a format they could understand and act upon. I sent a 12-page report with specific recommendations, timelines, and business impact assessments. Robert asked about that exact report. Derek said it was too technical and buried in unnecessary detail for decision-makers to parse effectively. He claimed that effective communication means distilling complex technical issues into actionable executive summaries. Sarah's expression was a mixture of disgust and professional concern. She'd worked closely with me for 8 years and had seen firsthand how thorough and clear my documentation typically was. There's more, she continued, lowering her voice even further. He's recommending a complete restructure of quality assurance. Wants to integrate all testing into the development sprints, eliminate what he calls redundant oversight layers, and implement what he's calling continuous deployment with real-time user feedback loops. That's not quality assurance, I said. That's just hoping users will debug your product for free. He's also suggesting that the technical team needs fresh leadership with modern perspectives. James thinks he's positioning himself to blame the entire senior technical staff and bring in his own people. The conversation was interrupted by Robert Fleming appearing in the doorway. Our CTO looked exhausted, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of the stress that came from explaining to investors why their portfolio company was trending on Twitter for all the wrong reasons. Alice, can I see you in my office? He asked, his tone carefully neutral but his eyes conveying something that might have been either sympathy or resignation. That night, I sat in my Capitol Hill apartment, laptop balanced on my kitchen counter, watching our company's reputation disintegrate in real time across multiple social media platforms, tech forums, and industry publications. User reviews on the App Store plummeted from 4.3 stars to 1.8 stars within 6 hours. Industry publications questioned our technical competence with headlines like "Has Green Bay lost its way?" and "From quality leader to quality disaster, what happened?" Potential investors were asking pointed questions. I knew this because Rachel forwarded me screenshots from her boyfriend, who worked in venture capital and was hearing our name mentioned in cautionary tales about companies that prioritize speed over stability. The financial implications were staggering. Our customer service team was working overtime to process refunds for double-charged transactions. The legal team was fielding calls about potential class action lawsuits. Our enterprise clients were scheduling emergency review meetings to discuss whether they could continue trusting us with their business-critical applications. But something else was happening simultaneously, something that would prove more significant than the immediate crisis. Current and former colleagues began reaching out privately through encrypted messages, personal emails, and careful phone calls from their home numbers rather than work lines. Engineers from other companies who'd heard about the disaster started sharing their own stories. Former Green Bay employees who'd left during Derek's modernization campaign began opening up about why they'd really left. The pattern that emerged was both infuriating and vindicating. "Alice, this is exactly what happened at Derek's previous company," wrote Michael Santos, a senior developer who'd worked with Derek at a startup called Velocity Labs that folded 18 months ago. Same pattern: dismiss experienced voices as legacy thinking, rush releases to hit arbitrary deadlines, then blame the technical team when everything collapses. 3 of us tried to warn the board there too. They replaced us with cheaper developers who didn't push back. Similar messages arrived throughout the evening. Derek's pattern was consistent across 3 companies over 5 years. Each time, he'd arrive promising innovation and efficiency. Each time, he'd marginalize senior technical staff who raised concerns about his methods. Each time, he'd push aggressive timelines that resulted in spectacular failures. And each time, he'd manage to blame others while positioning himself for his next opportunity. I spent the weekend systematically documenting Derek's pattern, creating what amounted to a comprehensive case study in destructive leadership. I tracked down former employees from his previous companies through LinkedIn, GitHub contributions, and professional networks. The stories were remarkably consistent. At Velocity Labs, Derek had convinced the board to eliminate their dedicated QA team 6 months before a major product launch. The resulting security breach exposed customer data for 40,000 users and triggered regulatory investigations that ultimately forced the company to shut down. At TechFlow Solutions, he'd implemented agile development sprints that were actually just shortened deadlines without corresponding reductions in scope. 3 senior developers quit within 2 months. The company's flagship product launched with so many bugs that their largest client canceled a $1 million contract. At Paradigm Dynamics, he'd restructured the engineering team to eliminate what he called innovation bottlenecks, which turned out to be the senior architects who understood the codebase's complex interdependencies. The resulting system redesign introduced performance problems so severe that the application became unusable during peak hours. Each story followed an identical narrative arc: initial promises of modernization, systematic dismissal of experienced voices, aggressive timelines that ignored technical realities, spectacular failures, and Derek's subsequent departure for a better opportunity while the remaining team spent months cleaning up the mess. More importantly, I discovered that Derek's approach wasn't innovative or forward-thinking. It was a recurring pattern of short-term optimization that consistently destroyed long-term value. He wasn't a visionary leader disrupting outdated methodologies. He was a serial destroyer of engineering cultures. The turning point came when Robert Fleming called me into his office the following Monday. His corner office overlooked the Space Needle, but today the view seemed irrelevant compared to the gravity of our conversation. Robert had printed copies of several documents spread across his desk: my original report, Derek's response, customer service logs, and what appeared to be research notes. "Alice, I want you to know that Derek has recommended we restructure the quality assurance department," he said, looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him in 7 years of working together. "Restructure how?" "Essentially eliminate it as a separate function. Integrate quality testing into the development sprints." He's calling it democratizing quality ownership across the entire engineering organization. That's not restructuring, Robert. That's elimination disguised as empowerment. When everyone is responsible for quality, no one is responsible for quality. He nodded slowly. "I've been reviewing the timeline of last week's events. I've also been reading your report from Monday night. Derek said it was too technical. It was thorough. Detailed. Exactly what I'd expect from someone with your experience." Robert leaned back in his chair. "I've also been doing some research on our product lead's track record." My heart rate quickened. What kind of research? The kind that reveals patterns. Tell me, Alice, if you were presenting to our board of directors about last week's incident, what would you say? I spent the next 2 hours walking Robert through everything. The ignored warnings, Derek's pattern of dismissing experienced staff, the correlation between his leadership style and technical disasters at previous companies. I need you to present this to the board Thursday morning, Robert said finally. Derek won't appreciate that. Derek won't be in the meeting. The boardroom felt like a courtroom. 8 directors sat around the polished oak table, their faces grave. I prepared extensively, but my hand still trembled slightly as I began. Ladies and gentlemen, last week's beta disaster wasn't a technical failure. It was a leadership failure. I walked them through the timeline methodically. Derek's dismissal of established quality protocols. His pattern of marginalizing senior technical staff. The documented warnings he'd ignored. The broader pattern of similar failures at his previous companies. Our company culture has always prioritized sustainable growth over reckless speed, I continued. That culture built our reputation for reliability. That reputation secured our partnerships with major enterprise clients. We're now at risk of losing both. Board member Patricia Wells leaned forward. What's your recommendation, Ms. Reeves? Restore the quality assurance protocols that have served us for 15 years. Rebuild the collaborative culture that made this company successful. And honestly evaluate whether our current product leadership aligns with our core values. The questions that followed were sharp but fair. They wanted specifics about the technical failures, documentation of the warnings Derek had ignored, and evidence of his pattern at other companies. 2 days later, Derek Lawson was no longer with Green Bay Technologies. The official announcement cited strategic differences regarding product development philosophy. The aftermath wasn't immediate vindication. We spent weeks rebuilding user trust, fixing the beta application, and reconstructing our quality assurance processes. But something fundamental had shifted. Senior staff who'd been marginalized found their voices again. Development timelines became realistic rather than aspirational. Quality became a shared responsibility rather than someone else's problem. 3 months later, we successfully launched the corrected version of our mobile app. User reviews were overwhelmingly positive. Industry publications praised our careful approach to user experience. The Series B funding came through ahead of schedule. Robert promoted me to Director of Product Quality, a role that bridges technical excellence with strategic planning. More importantly, he asked me to help design leadership evaluation criteria that would prevent future Derek Lawsons from disrupting our culture. Sometimes I think about that morning when Derek asked why the app was crashing. The answer was always simple, because we abandoned the practices that had kept us successful for 15 years. Because we mistook recklessness for innovation. Because we silenced the voices that could have prevented disaster. The real question wasn't why the system failed. It was why we'd stopped listening to the people who understood how to keep it working. Today, when junior developers ask me about dealing with difficult leadership, I tell them this: your experience has value, your caution serves a purpose, and sometimes the most innovative thing you can do is prevent a disaster rather than recover from one. The beta launch that was supposed to prove we could move fast ended up proving we'd never forgotten how to build things right. Sometimes the old methods aren't outdated, they're just waiting for the right moment to show their worth.